They heard a cry at dawn. On their porch, 3 newborns lay bundled in a basket. A note read, "You need them more than I do." The couple had long buried the hope of children until now. The first cry wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Miriam stood at the wood-burning stove, spooning oats into 2 chipped bowls when she heard it, soft, breathy, almost like a kitten. She turned. "Did you hear that?" she asked over her shoulder. Jeremiah, hunched in his chair by the window with his Bible open in his lap, tilted his head. "I did." Another whimper followed, then 2 more, faint but unmistakable. She dropped the spoon, the clatter loud against the hush of morning. In less than a breath, they were both at the door. Jeremiah's hands shook as he pulled it open. He hadn't moved this fast in years. There, nestled in a basket worn at the edges, were 3 tiny bundles. One wiggled beneath the cloth, the other 2 still but breathing. A folded scrap of parchment sat on top. In a shaky scrawl it read, "You need them more than I do." For a moment, neither of them moved. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. Tears sprang up before she even realized they were coming. I don't understand," she whispered. Jeremiah crouched slowly, creaking at the knees, and reached into the basket. His fingers brushed the infant's cheeks. Warm, alive. He looked up at his wife, eyes glassy. "They're newborns, Miriam. Look at the cord stumps fresh." Miriam dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling as she gently unwrapped one of the babies. A girl, with a head of dark curls and fists balled tight against her chest. Her lips moved in that searching way babies do when hungry. "Who would do this?" Miriam asked, voice breaking. "Who could leave them like this?" Jeremiah was still staring at the note, his jaw tightened. Someone who thought they had no other choice. They brought them inside with the reverence of cradling something holy. Miriam wrapped the babies in clean linens. One of them, a boy, had a tiny birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon behind his ear. She noticed it as she wiped the crust from his eyes. The cabin was warm, but the fire still burned low, so she stoked it and pulled the rocker close. All 3 infants now lay in a woven cradle Jeremiah had made decades ago, the one they never got to use. "We don't even have milk," she murmured, brushing the edge of a blanket. "I'll head to town," Jeremiah said. "The mercantile might have some goat's milk left, or powdered formula if we're lucky." She looked up at him, weary. "They'll ask questions." "Let them." By noon, word had spread. Folks in town always noticed when Jeremiah rode in early. They also noticed when he bought baby supplies, milk, bottles, soft cloth diapers, salves. When he walked out of the mercantile, he found the blacksmith's wife waiting. "Jeremiah, you didn't adopt, did you?" she asked, brows pinched in confusion. "No." "Then whose babies?" He met her gaze. "They were left on our porch this morning." The woman covered her mouth, "All 3 of them." He nodded. She whispered a prayer. Back at the homestead, Miriam hadn't moved from the rocker. She was humming something low and old, a lullaby her mother once sang, though her voice cracked from time to time. The smallest of the triplets had a rattle in his chest. She noticed it while feeding him. A worry sat like a stone in her gut. "Please," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead, "don't take him from me too." The room blurred around her. Too many memories of losses, of empty cradles and whispered condolences, of her arms aching for years with nothing to hold. She didn't know how long she cried before Jeremiah returned. "They're beautiful," he said gently, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They're ours now." Night fell with a strange stillness. Neither of them spoke much. Miriam stayed up long after the babies slept, watching each breath rise and fall. At some point, Jeremiah brought her tea and she forgot to drink it. The note lay on the table between them. "You think it was a mother?" she asked finally. Jeremiah didn't answer right away. "Whoever it was, they knew we were the kind who'd open the door." I just don't understand how anyone could walk away." He looked at her. Or maybe they didn't walk away. Maybe they stayed just out of sight, just long enough to be sure we would. A week passed, then another. The triplets, named Lee, Joel, and Hope, grew stronger, louder, hungrier. Miriam and Jeremiah aged backwards. That's how it felt. She was humming more. He was chopping wood like a man half his age. Neighbors began dropping by again, not just to bring supplies but to sit and hold the babies, to offer names and prayers. But the question lingered, unspoken. Where was their mother? And why leave them here? The answer came on a rain-soaked Thursday. Jeremiah was out tending the fence line when he spotted a figure at the edge of the woods. Small, soaked, barefoot. He called out. The figure bolted. He didn't chase. He went inside, fetched a blanket, and laid it on the porch with a jar of stew and bread. Then he waited. The next morning the food was gone. And beside the empty jar, folded neatly, was a new note. "Are they okay?" Jeremiah's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the new note from the porch. It was written on the same parchment as the first, creased, smudged at the edges, the words faint but clear enough to read. "Are they okay?" He stared at it for a long moment, heart tightening in a way he hadn't expected. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone who had left 3 helpless infants in their care and still cared. He brought it inside. Miriam was rocking Joel, who had just settled after a long, colicky night. She looked up when Jeremiah came in, eyes tired but soft with the glow of motherhood she thought she'd never wear. "You're soaked," she murmured, then noticed the expression on his face. "What is it?" He held out the note. She read it once, then again, and then simply covered her mouth with one hand. "She's still out there." Jeremiah nodded. "I saw her, I think, a small figure in the trees. She ran when I called out." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She didn't abandon them, she's still watching. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her back. She didn't want to let go, she just didn't think she had another choice. They didn't speak for a while after that. The babies stirred and cooed softly in their cradle, unaware of the storm that raged outside or the heartbreak that lingered in the corners of the room. Later that afternoon, Miriam bundled a few things, a dry blanket, some biscuits, a jar of stew, and left them on the porch with a note of her own. "They are safe. They are loved. If you need warmth, we'll leave the lantern lit." The basket was gone by morning. So was the stew. The next evening another note arrived. This one said, "I named her Lee. The others didn't have names. I was too afraid to hope." Miriam read the line over and over again, tears falling freely now. Jeremiah didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. For the first time in years, the house felt full, not just of children but of purpose. As the days grew colder, signs of the woman's presence became more frequent. The woodpile, which Jeremiah had kept moderately stocked, began mysteriously growing overnight. The barn doors, often creaky and troublesome, started swinging open more smoothly. Someone was fixing the hinges. "She's staying close," Jeremiah said one morning as he whittled a toy rattle for Hope. Miriam sat nearby, folding clean linens. "She doesn't trust us enough to come forward." "She doesn't trust herself," he replied. "She thinks she's broken." Miriam's hand stilled. "I know that feeling." Jeremiah's eyes found hers. He set the rattle aside. "You were never broken, Miriam, you were hurting." She gave a watery smile. "And now?" "You're healing." One night after all 3 babies had finally gone quiet, Miriam stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and left a different kind of note on the porch. "We're not here to replace you. We just want you to be part of their lives. You gave them life. That means something." She stayed up late, rocking back and forth in Jeremiah's old chair, humming the tune her mother used to sing. The fire popped in the hearth. Wind howled beyond the windows. But she stayed awake until the first birdsong. Then she checked the porch. There was no reply. But there were footprints in the snow, small, bare, and pointed away from the cabin. The next week passed quietly. Lee's first tooth came in. Jeremiah noticed first when she tried to gum his finger and bit down hard enough to make him yelp. "She's a strong one," he laughed, showing Miriam the tiny indent on his fingertip. Hope began babbling too, stringing together sounds that made no sense, but lit up her eyes with joy every time Miriam responded. And Joel still wheezed when he slept. The rattle hadn't gone away. Miriam grew more anxious by the day, holding him close every night, praying softly over his chest, her hands never straying far from his tiny back. "He's going to pull through," Jeremiah told her one night, watching as she rocked him endlessly. "He's stronger than he looks." "He has to be," she whispered. "They all do." Then, just when things felt stable again, it happened. Jeremiah had gone to town for supplies. Miriam was alone with the children. Snow had started to fall, gentle and silent, blanketing the homestead in white. She was setting Joel down in the cradle when the front door creaked. She turned sharply. A woman stood there. Soaked, trembling, her cheeks gaunt, eyes wide and frantic. She looked maybe 19, 20 at most. Her hair was matted to her head, clothes clinging to her like they hadn't been dry in days. She held no weapon, just a look of sheer panic. "I didn't mean to startle you," she whispered. "Please, I just needed to see them." Miriam moved slowly, placing her hand on the cradle. "You're their mother." She nodded. "I couldn't stay away." "You left them on our porch," Miriam said gently, "with a note." The girl's hands shook. "I thought they'd die with me. I had nowhere, no one. I thought if I left them here, maybe they'd live." "They did," Miriam whispered. They're loved." The girl's eyes welled with tears. "Do they hate me?" "They don't even know yet what it means to hate," Miriam said. "But one day they'll know you love them enough to let them go." The girl sank to her knees on the rug, sobbing. "I couldn't do it anymore. I hadn't eaten in 3 days. I was too cold to think straight. I just wanted them safe." Miriam walked over, knelt beside her, and pulled her into an embrace. The girl clung to her like a lifeline. "No one's blaming you," Miriam murmured. "You're safe now. Come inside. Come in for real this time." Jeremiah returned to find the girl asleep on the rocker, bundled in wool. Miriam sat beside her with Joel in her arms. "She came back," he said softly. "She never really left." Her name was Tessa. She had been a farmhand's daughter, orphaned at 16, pregnant at 18. She fled the town when word spread of her condition, fearing the same judgment that had buried her mother's name in shame years ago. She had given birth to the triplets alone in an abandoned barn, cutting the cords with a knife she barely knew how to use, wrapping the babies in the only warmth she had, her own coat, and walking miles through the freezing night until she saw the glow of the couple's porch. She had no plan after that, just desperation. "You gave us a gift," Miriam told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "Let us give something back." Tessa blinked. "Like what?" "A second chance, a real family." There were long days ahead, explanations to neighbors, paperwork to file, choices to make about the children's future. But for now, the cabin was warm. The babies were growing. The fire never went out. And 3 people who had once believed their stories were over had begun writing new ones together. Tessa hadn't meant to stay. Her arrival had been driven by instinct, a desperate pull toward the porch she once stumbled to with 3 babies pressed to her chest, soaked and shivering, with nothing but fear and a sliver of hope left in her soul. But the moment she'd been wrapped in that wool blanket, the moment Miriam whispered, "You're safe now," a dam broke inside her, and she didn't know how to leave again. "I'll go soon," she whispered the next morning while cradling Lee. "I didn't come to intrude." Miriam, sitting beside her with Joel tucked in her lap, gave a soft smile. You've already given us more than we ever dreamed of. Stay, rest, heal." Jeremiah, leaning against the doorframe with a mug of coffee, added, "You're not intruding. You're part of this now." That word "part" settled into Tessa's chest like a lit candle, warm, new, fragile. The babies had taken to her instantly, as if their hearts remembered her heartbeat even after the long weeks apart. Lee squealed every time Tessa entered the room, lifting her tiny arms to be held. Hope quieted when Tessa whispered lullabies. And Joel, always the frailest, slept best against his mother's chest. Still, Tessa hesitated. She slept on the rocking chair, even after Jeremiah offered to build a cot. She helped around the house, but always with her head slightly bowed, waiting for the day she'd be told, kindly or not, that it was time to move on. Miriam saw it. She saw the way Tessa flinched when someone raised a voice, even in laughter. The way she turned her head away when praised. The way she never asked for anything. It broke Miriam's heart quietly. One day, as snow fell softly against the windows, Miriam invited Tessa to sit with her at the table. They drank tea together in silence for a while before Miriam finally asked, "When was the last time someone celebrated your birthday?" Tessa blinked. I don't remember." "We don't either," Miriam said, smiling. "But maybe we can make today count." Jeremiah brought out a small apple pie he'd snuck back from town, with a candle melted into the center. "It's not much," he said sheepishly, "but it's something." Tessa cried before she could even blow the candle out. As the winter wore on, the house transformed. The rocking chair that once belonged only to Miriam became shared between the two women. The crib Jeremiah had crafted by hand, once too big for 3 tiny bodies, now felt just right. Tessa learned to bake under Miriam's guidance, learned to chop wood under Jeremiah's steady instruction, and for the first time in years she laughed, not politely, not nervously, but deeply, fully, as if joy had become something she could carry in her own hands. Neighbors began to talk, some judged. "Who is that girl living with the old couple?" they whispered. But others, especially those who had once whispered prayers for Miriam and Jeremiah's empty home, saw something different. They saw healing. They saw love. They saw a miracle unfolding in quiet, daily moments. Then one night, Joel stopped breathing. It began with a cough. A tiny, raspy, wheezing cough. Then he gasped. Miriam heard it first and was at his cradle before the others could stand. Tessa rushed in behind her, heart slamming against her ribs, and found Miriam already lifting the baby, patting his back, tears pouring down her face. Jeremiah burst through the door. "What's happening?" "He's not breathing," Miriam cried. "Give him to me," Tessa said with a voice she didn't recognize as her own. "Please." She took Joel into her arms, fingers trembling, and pressed him to her chest. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Breathe, please breathe. Mama's here." Nothing. Then a tiny, ragged cry tore from his lungs. He gasped again, then again, until he was wailing. Everyone in the room collapsed in relief. Miriam sobbed. Jeremiah pressed his forehead to the wall, whispering a thank you to the heavens. Tessa held her baby as if she'd never let go again. "We need help," she said, breathless. "A doctor, medicine, I don't care what it costs." Jeremiah was already pulling on his coat. "I'll ride now. I'll bring back Doc Foster." "No," Tessa said, "let me." "You shouldn't." "I've walked farther for less," she said, eyes fierce. "Let me do this." He hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Take my horse, she's fast." Tessa kissed Joel's forehead and handed him to Miriam. "I'll be back by dawn." The ride into town was a blur of wind and cold and prayer. Tessa gripped the reins like her life depended on it. Her mind replayed Joel's cries, the way his chest had stilled. Every tree she passed whispered doubts. Every gust of wind threatened to pull her hope away. But she didn't stop. Not when her fingers numbed. Not when her eyes burned from the wind. Not when a coyote's howl echoed in the dark. She reached the doctor's home, just as the sky began to pale with morning light. Doc Foster, a stout man with thick glasses and a gruff heart, rubbed sleep from his eyes when she pounded on his door. "Who, Tessa? Is that you?" "He's sick," she gasped. "The baby, you have to come, please." He stopped breathing. Without hesitation, the doctor grabbed his bag. Back at the cabin, Miriam sat with Joel pressed against her chest, rocking back and forth, humming songs from another life. Jeremiah paced the porch, staring down the trail for signs of Tessa. When he finally saw her, slumped forward on the saddle, Doc Foster riding hard behind her, he ran to meet them. Tessa nearly collapsed as Jeremiah caught her. "He's inside," she breathed. Doc Foster nodded and pushed past the door. Time slowed. Jeremiah helped Tessa into a chair. Miriam couldn't speak, just watched the doctor lean over Joel with his instruments, his sharp gaze never leaving the baby's face. Minutes passed. Then Doc Foster sighed and stood. "He's going to be all right," he said softly. "But he's got a weak lung. He'll need special care, warmth, clean air, gentle feeds." Tessa wept, forehead on her knees. Miriam held her. Jeremiah gripped the doctor's shoulder, choking back his own tears. "Thank you." Doc Foster looked at the three of them and then the cradle holding the now peacefully sleeping baby. "Looks like he's got more than medicine on his side. He's got a family." Later, when the storm passed and the cabin grew quiet again, Jeremiah lit the fire while Tessa sat beside it, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You saved him," Jeremiah said. She shook her head. "We all did." "No," he said, sitting beside her. "You did. You risked everything. You didn't run away. You didn't wait for someone else to fix it." She looked into the fire. "I used to believe I was a burden, that every space I entered was worse for having me in it." Jeremiah reached over and took her hand. "Not this space, not this home." "I've never had a home," she whispered. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You do now." Spring was weeks away, but already the snow was beginning to melt. Jeremiah began rebuilding the barn, whistling as he worked. Miriam sewed curtains for the spare room, where they planned to build a small nursery nook. And Tessa stood on the porch each morning, Lee on her hip, watching the world bloom again. She no longer slept in the rocker. She had her own bed now. She had a voice in the home. She had a family. And she had 3 little hearts beating strong beneath her own. Spring rolled in on a breath of thawed earth and shy sunlight. It crept in softly, melting the last crusts of snow around the porch, luring sleepy birds back to the trees, and cooing the first green buds from the branches. And with it came something Tessa hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first loud voice, or the kind borrowed in fleeting moments, but the real, anchoring kind. The kind you build with bare hands and shared meals, with whispered lullabies and muddy boots left on the porch. The kind that sneaks into your bones until you realize you've stopped flinching, until you realize you're home. The triplets were growing fast. Hope, the most curious, had taken to crawling across the kitchen floor like she had places to be. Lee babbled constantly, often stringing sounds together as if she was on the verge of speaking her first real word. And Joel, sweet, quiet Joel, watched it all with wide, patient eyes, always content just to be held. Miriam, watching them from her rocker, said softly one day, "They'll never know the ache of being unwanted. Not here. Not under this roof." Tessa blinked back tears. She hadn't thought it possible to hear words like that and believe them, but now she did, at least most days. Still, some nights brought shadows. Like the night Tessa woke gasping from a dream where she was running again, babies in her arms, boots sinking into mud, someone chasing close behind. She sat up in bed, heart racing. A knock came at her door. "Tessa," it was Miriam, candle in hand, voice gentle. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Tessa whispered. "Just bad dream." Miriam stepped inside, sat beside her. "Want to talk about it?" "I dreamed I lost them again, that I couldn't save them, that I came back to the porch and you were all gone." Miriam put an arm around her. "You didn't lose them, and you're not going to. You belong here. We're not going anywhere." Tessa leaned into her, letting the warmth soak in. "I still don't understand why you took me in." "Because we needed each other," Miriam said. "That note said it best, you need them more than I do. But maybe it went both ways. Maybe you needed us too." In town, rumors had begun to spread, friendly ones. People who once pitied the old couple on the hill now spoke of them with admiration. "Can you believe Jeremiah and Miriam are raising triplets?" they'd say at the general store. "And did you hear about the young woman who's with them? That's the baby's mother. Came back for them in the middle of a blizzard." "Real miracle," someone added. Of course, not everyone approved. One afternoon, when Jeremiah rode into town for seed and supplies, he overheard two men talking on the steps of the mercantile. "I still say it's improper," the first man grumbled. "Single girl living with a married couple ain't natural. She's probably looking to snatch their land." The other spat. "Mark my words, one of those kids gets sick, folks'll blame her." Jeremiah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had no use for idle mouths, only truth. Back at home, he didn't mention it, not yet. But the words lingered, poisoning the wind. The first real storm of the season struck late one evening. It came fast and furious. Howling winds, hail slamming against the windows, thunder rumbling deep like an angry giant rolling in the sky. Jeremiah bolted the shutters. Miriam gathered candles. Tessa clutched Joel tight against her chest as lightning lit up the walls. Then came a knock at the door. Hard, urgent. Jeremiah opened it, lantern in hand, and was met by the sheriff. "Evening," Sheriff Barlow said, removing his hat. Rain streamed down his coat. "Sorry to bother y'all in this weather, but we've got a situation." Jeremiah stepped aside. "Come in, what's going on?" The sheriff entered and nodded at the gathered family. "It's about the girl, Tessa." Tessa stiffened, holding Joel closer. Sheriff Barlow sighed. "Someone filed a report, claimed you might have taken those babies unlawfully, claimed you ran from another town, that you abandoned them once and now might be trying to exploit this couple for shelter." Silence. Jeremiah's hand curled into a fist. "That's a lie." "I figured," the sheriff said gently, "but I'm required to follow up, just need to ask a few questions, verify things." Miriam stepped forward. She saved those babies, risked her life getting back to them. If she hadn't come when she did, Joel wouldn't be alive. "I believe you," Barlow said. "I do, but there's procedures. I'll need to take a statement from her and from you." Tessa finally found her voice. "Do I have to leave?" "No, ma'am," he said softly. "Not unless there's reason to. I'm just here to get clarity, that's all." Still, Tessa felt cold all the way to her bones. The next day, Jeremiah hitched the wagon and took Tessa into town for her statement. As they rode, Tessa sat silent, watching the landscape blur past, trees blooming with green, streams thawed and babbling. But inside her, it still felt like winter. "You don't have to come," she said quietly. "I'm not letting you walk in there alone," Jeremiah replied. "Not now, not ever." They arrived at the courthouse, where Barlow met them with a warm smile and ushered them into a small back room. The questions weren't cruel, just thorough. Where had Tessa come from? How had she ended up alone? Why had she left the babies? What made her return? She answered honestly, voice steady. When she finished, Barlow leaned back and let out a long sigh. "Well," he said, rubbing his jaw, "sounds like a whole lot of heartbreak and a whole lot of bravery." That it is, Jeremiah said firmly. You done. One more thing, the sheriff said, reaching into his desk. Got something for you, came in the mail last week. He handed her a letter. Tessa took it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was familiar. Her breath caught. It was from her sister. She hadn't seen her in years. She opened it slowly, heart pounding. Tessa, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't even know if you're alive. But I heard rumors about a girl who left her babies on a porch during a blizzard and then came back for them. If that's you, I'm sorry. For everything. Mama's gone, and I should have come after you. If you ever forgive me, I'm in Benson now. Come find me. Claire. Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks. Jeremiah read her expression but didn't press. He just stood, placed a hand on her shoulder. Whatever you want to do next, we'll figure it out. Back at the cabin, Miriam was waiting on the porch, rocking the babies and singing softly. She saw the letter in Tessa's hand, the emotion in her face, and didn't ask questions. She simply opened her arms. Later that night, Tessa stood at the window watching the moon rise over the mountains. Joel slept peacefully against her chest, and for the first time she let herself imagine a future, not just for the babies, but for herself too. Tomorrow, she whispered, I'll write her back. Then she kissed Joel's forehead and turned toward the warmth of home. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when Tessa woke to the soft rustle of feet on the wooden floor. She sat up and found Jeremiah already at the stove, coaxing a flame beneath the kettle. Miriam was rocking Hope and humming a low tune, her eyes bleary but peaceful. The letter from Claire sat folded on the nightstand. All night it had tugged at Tessa's thoughts, spinning and twisting them into loops she hadn't known her heart still remembered. There had been so much pain, so many years where Claire had vanished from her life, siding with their mother, then disappearing entirely when Tessa needed her most. But now there was this letter, the first olive branch, the first apology. And the question, did she want to open that door? As she stood and cradled Joel, her mind swirled. Could forgiveness live in the same heart that remembered abandonment? Could love be offered when trust still limped behind? She didn't have the answers. But she had something else now, a home where she could ask them. Later that day, after feeding the babies and sweeping the porch, she sat down with a pencil and paper. Claire, I got your letter. I didn't think I ever would. A lot's changed. I'm a mother now, to 3 of the most beautiful, stubborn, miraculous babies. They saved me as much as I saved them. I'm still not sure if I'm ready to come to Benson. But thank you for reaching out. I needed that more than you know. Tessa. She sealed the letter and gave it to Jeremiah to mail next time he went into town. Then she returned to the babies, rocking them slowly, watching as Hope tugged at a strand of Miriam's hair and laughed. Summer brought life back in full. The ranch flourished with wildflowers blooming across the hills and bees buzzing like strings on a fiddle. Tessa took to walking the trails each morning with Joel strapped to her chest, and the girls in a twin-seated basket Jeremiah had fashioned for her. She'd hum lullabies under her breath while pointing out birds and chipmunks and clouds that looked like ducks. One morning, they reached the top of a low ridge and she paused to catch her breath. The land sprawled before them in golden waves, soft and forgiving. She turned to the babies. This is yours now, she said, your home. Back at the house, Miriam was baking peach cobbler, and Jeremiah was in the barn repairing a broken latch when a dust cloud stirred at the edge of the property. Tessa watched from the kitchen window as 2 horses trotted into view, pulling a wagon with supplies stacked high in the back. At the reins sat a man in a brown hat and a woman beside him, one hand gripping the frame, the other pressed tight to her mouth. Tessa's blood went cold. She knew that face, even after all these years. Claire. Jeremiah appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He raised a brow at Tessa, who was frozen by the sink. "Tessa," he said, "you all right?" She didn't answer, just pushed open the door and stepped into the yard. Claire climbed down slowly, eyes fixed on her. The years had weathered her like desert wind on sandstone, older, thinner, worn at the edges, but her expression, that was unchanged. That was guilt. And longing. And something so close to love that Tessa could hardly breathe. "Tessa," Claire said, voice breaking, I didn't think you'd write back. I thought maybe the letter wouldn't reach you, but when it did, I had to come." Tessa's feet refused to move. "I needed to say it in person," Claire went on. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Then she knelt. "Right there in the dirt. I should have come for you, should have fought for you. You were my sister, and I left you to face it all alone." Miriam appeared behind Tessa, holding Lee. Joel let out a soft coo, squirming in Tessa's arms. The spell broke. Tessa stepped forward, not running, but not retreating either. She crouched in front of her sister, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You did leave me," she said, "but I survived." Claire nodded, eyes swimming. "And I found them," Tessa whispered, turning slightly so Claire could see the bundle in her arms. "My babies. They were worth every bit of pain it took to get here." Claire reached out with trembling fingers. "May I?" Tessa hesitated, then nodded. Claire brushed her hand against Joel's cheek and let out a sob so deep it sounded like it came from the pit of her soul. "I'll never make up for the time we lost," she said, "but if you let me, I'd like to be part of their lives." Tessa looked down at the tiny face nestled against her. Then over at Miriam and Jeremiah, who stood watching silently, their expressions unreadable. "I can't promise anything," Tessa said, "but you're here now and that matters." Claire stayed for 3 days. They talked more in those 72 hours than in the 10 years before it. She apologized over and over, not just for what happened but for what didn't, for the birthdays missed, the nights she hadn't written, the silence when Tessa was crying out for help. She held Hope and Lee, played peekaboo with Joel, and even helped Miriam hang laundry in the dry heat of the afternoon. But when it came time to leave, she didn't ask to stay. "I don't want to intrude," she said quietly. "You've built something beautiful here, and I need to rebuild myself before I ever think about staying in your world." Tessa hugged her for a long time, then waved as the wagon rolled down the trail and out of sight. When she turned back, Miriam was wiping her eyes. Jeremiah just nodded once as if to say, "You did good, kid." Weeks passed. The sheriff stopped by again, this time not for questions but with a letter. "Just thought you should know," he said, handing it to Tessa. "Your name's been cleared. There was never any real case, just rumors, but it's official now. You're safe." Tessa clutched the letter, heart pounding. Safe. She carried the babies out to the hill that evening, sitting with them beneath the spreading limbs of a cottonwood tree. The wind smelled like sage and sunlight. She pressed her forehead to Joel's and whispered, "You're safe too." But peace was not without its storms. One day, while Jeremiah was in town, Miriam slipped on a patch of wet floor in the kitchen and hit her hip hard against the stove. Tessa rushed to her side. "I'm fine," Miriam grunted, waving off concern. But by nightfall, her face was pale and she couldn't walk without gasping. They laid her down gently, Tessa bathing her feet, the babies unusually quiet. "Call the doctor," Miriam finally whispered, "just in case." Jeremiah returned within the hour, racing in with Doc Hartman behind him. After examining her, the doctor said it wasn't broken, but the bone was bruised and would take time to heal. "She needs rest," he said. "No chores, no stress." Miriam looked sheepish. Jeremiah took her hand and kissed it. "You're stuck with me now," he teased. Good, Miriam whispered. I like being stuck with you. But the days that followed weren't easy. Tessa handled most of the chores, helped with Miriam, and cared for the babies all while the summer heat bore down in relentless waves. But she never complained. Because in her heart, she was finally living the life she used to dream about from cold alleyways and cracked windows. Every night she sat with the babies beneath the stars, humming them to sleep and whispering promises she'd carve into the world if she had to. You'll never know the hunger I knew, she told them. You'll never wonder if you're loved. You'll never be alone. She didn't know where their road would lead. But she knew this. It started with 3 bundles on a porch in the dead of winter. And now it pulsed with life. The first whisper of autumn came in the form of wind through the tall grass, rustling like skirts dancing across an empty church floor. Tessa stood out on the porch, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, Joel bundled snug against her chest as he drifted to sleep. Inside, Miriam sat upright in a cushioned chair near the hearth, a patchwork blanket over her lap and Lee on her knees. Hope was rolling wooden blocks across the floor, laughing softly every time they clattered into one another. Jeremiah was whittling a new rattle, the pile of curls from the shaving stacking at his boots. It was peace. Not the kind Tessa had ever known, but the kind she imagined people prayed for. Not quiet for the sake of silence, but safety. A hush that comes from the certainty no one's coming to take anything from you again. But peace wasn't always permanent. And Tessa, no matter how far removed she tried to live from fear, could still feel it when it crept in like a cold wind under the door. That night, after putting the babies to bed, she stayed up late with Miriam. You all right? The older woman asked, watching her as she stirred the fire needlessly. I don't know, Tessa admitted. I keep thinking about the letter, Claire's visit, the sheriff, and now there's this weight like something's coming. Miriam nodded slowly. Sometimes peace feels heavier than hardship, especially when you've lived with grief long enough that joy feels like a trick. Tessa's throat tightened. I don't want to lose this. You won't, Miriam said, placing a hand on hers. But if you do, we'll build again. We always do. That's what makes us mothers, even the ones who never had children before. We learn to rebuild. Tessa leaned into her and cried, soft and slow. 2 weeks later, just as the leaves began to turn, the doctor came back. Not for Miriam this time, but for the baby's checkup. Well, he said, lifting Hope into the air before handing her back to Tessa, you've done something remarkable. They're healthy, strong, and ahead of where most infants their age are. You've made a home here, a real one. Tessa's eyes brimmed with tears, and she looked at Jeremiah, who simply nodded, quiet pride in every line of his face. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. But just as the doctor packed up and stepped off the porch, a wagon creaked up the path. Not Claire this time. A man in a dark coat, tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge. The sheriff. And beside him, a woman with a heavy scarf around her neck, holding a notebook and pen. Jeremiah's brow furrowed. Afternoon, Sheriff, something wrong. The sheriff dismounted and removed his hat. Sorry to disturb. This here is Miss Dalton. She's with the Territorial Office of Children's Affairs. Tessa's stomach dropped. We had a report, Miss Dalton said calmly, flipping her notebook open, about abandoned children on an unregistered homestead. Normally we disregard a rumor like that, but with so many orphans in the territory these days, we're required to follow up. They weren't abandoned, Tessa said, stepping forward with Joel in her arms. They were left on our porch with a note. We've raised them, cared for them since that day. Miss Dalton's eyes softened when she saw the baby, but her tone remained steady. I believe you, but we still need to ensure the children are safe and that no illegal adoption occurred. Do you have the note? Tessa nodded. Jeremiah ran inside and returned with the folded scrap of paper, the ink still visible though faded from handling. Miss Dalton read it silently, then again aloud. "You need them more than I do. Do you know who wrote this?" "No," Tessa said. "We've wondered, but no one ever came forward." Miss Dalton was quiet for a long while. Then she said, "We'll need to stay in town for a few days while I write my report. I won't remove the children, not unless there's evidence of harm or neglect, and clearly there is none, but I must follow procedure." Tessa clutched Joel tighter. "They're my babies." The woman's face softened. "I can see that. I'll be in touch." As the wagon rolled away, the peace they'd built felt like it stood on cracked ice. Tessa was quiet for days. Every giggle from the babies felt precious, every hug a little more desperate. She barely slept, hovering beside their cribs, listening for their breath, humming lullabies even in her dreams. Jeremiah tried to comfort her, so did Miriam. "They wouldn't take them," Miriam said. "Not after seeing this place, this family." But Tessa couldn't believe in safety that easily. Not after a life like hers. Then one evening, a knock came at the door. "Claire." She stepped in without waiting to be invited, crumpled letter in hand. "They came to my house," she said breathlessly, "asking questions about you, about the babies." Tessa's heart thudded. "What did you tell them?" "That you're the most capable, loving mother I've ever seen. That I left you once and I won't stand by and let anyone do that to you again. Tessa, I swear, if they try to take them." "They won't," Jeremiah said firmly from behind her, "because they'd have to go through all of us." The three of them stood in the kitchen like soldiers preparing for a siege. But nothing happened that night. Or the next. Until the letter arrived. A simple envelope, no wax seal, no courthouse stamp. Tessa opened it with trembling hands. Inside was one page. "After a thorough investigation and testimony from the community, we find no cause to pursue the removal of the 3 children in your care. They are safe. They are yours." Tessa crumpled to the floor, sobbing. Jeremiah knelt beside her, arms wrapping around her shoulders as Joel fussed in her lap. "They're ours," she whispered again and again. "They're ours." Time passed. The babies learned to crawl, then to walk. Hope was the boldest, always the first to try something new, always the first to tumble and cry and stand again, stronger. Lee was quieter, more thoughtful, often standing beside Miriam in the kitchen mimicking her every movement. And Joel, he was a storm of joy, toddling from one lap to the next, arms stretched wide for anyone who would hold him. Miriam's health returned slowly, her limp less noticeable, her laughter more frequent. Claire visited often. And Tessa found her voice in ways she hadn't known she'd lost it, singing lullabies she once only whispered, reading books aloud even when no one listened, planting flowers along the fence and calling them by name like they were old friends. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. Dark, heavy clouds, wind that howled like a pack of wolves. Tessa raced to bring in laundry, Jeremiah secured the barn, Miriam rocked the babies to sleep. And when the lightning cracked open the sky, Tessa stood at the window, clutching her shawl and praying. Not out of fear, but gratitude. "Lord," she whispered, "you gave me ashes and turned them into beauty. You gave me loss and turned it into love. I don't deserve them, but I'll never stop trying." Jeremiah stood behind her, resting his hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said. She turned, nodding. And together they watched the storm pass. The next day, the babies ran through puddles like wild ponies, mud streaking their clothes and sunlight breaking through the clouds like a benediction. Tessa stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded, laughter on her lips. They were hers. And nothing, no storm, no shadow, no memory, would ever take them again. Morning began with flower dust in the air. sun slanting through the kitchen window, and Lee tugging on Tessa's apron with a sticky hand full of biscuit dough. Mama, Hope took my spoon again. Hope, with biscuit dough on her chin, grinned from the chair and waved the wooden spoon in the air like a flag of victory. Joel squealed from the floor, holding a mixing bowl upside down over his head, giggling as if he'd conquered the world. Tessa laughed, kneeling to take the bowl from Joel, brushing flour off his curls. "All right, my little tornado, let's not make this a storm." Life had become a pattern, not dull but familiar, warm, woven through with love so gentle it felt like something sacred. But even in peace, the past didn't always stay buried. That afternoon, Jeremiah rode into town for supplies, and as the babies napped, Tessa sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea and Miriam in the rocking chair beside her. "You know," Miriam said, her voice quiet but strong, "you've changed." Tessa glanced over, "In a good way." "In the best way," she smiled. "You used to flinch at every sound, carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Now, you move with light in your step." Tessa looked down at her hands, the same hands that once bled against rough boards, clutched to her ribs in dark alleyways, trembled under fear. Now they were soft from holding babies, calloused from sewing and baking, steady from love. "I feel different," she admitted, "like I was just a shadow before, and now." "You're whole," Miriam finished. "You're a mother." Tessa's throat tightened. "I didn't think I ever could be." "And yet," Miriam said, "look what God gave you, a family, a home, not in the way you expected, but exactly how you needed." Later that day, Jeremiah returned with the wagon loaded down with oats, dried beans, cloth, and 3 small wooden rocking horses he'd secretly carved for the babies. "They're not much," he said, half sheepish, "but they might like them come Christmas." Tessa didn't speak. She just pulled him into a tight embrace and didn't let go. But joy was always shadowed by what came next. Because 2 days later, the letter came. Not addressed to Tessa, but to Jeremiah. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. He read it once, then handed it silently to Tessa. "To whoever found my children. I have no right to ask this. I left them because I was dying and I knew I couldn't care for them, but the Lord didn't take me. I'm sick, yes, but alive. I never stopped thinking of them. I tried to find them, but by the time I could walk again, the town was gone. If they are safe, if you are kind, please let me see them once. I don't want to take them, I just want to know they're okay. Please." A desperate mother. Tessa's hands shook. 100 feelings stormed through her all at once: fear, confusion, compassion, protectiveness, even anger. "Do you believe her?" she asked softly. Jeremiah ran a hand through his graying hair. "I don't know, but the fact that she wrote it all, that she asked instead of demanded, it says something." Tessa stared at the words again. "What do we do?" Jeremiah met her eyes. "We pray, and then we decide together." They prayed that night. Long after the babies were tucked in, the fire had burned low, and the windows went dark. Tessa knelt beside the bed, hands clenched tight, whispering not just for answers but for strength. "Lord, I don't know what's right. I only know I love them. I only know I'd give my life for them. If this woman, if she's their mother, help me know what to do." Jeremiah sat beside her, silently holding her hand. They decided to write back. A simple reply. "They are safe. We will not give them up. But if you truly seek only peace and not custody, we will speak in person. Come to the chapel on the hill 3 days from now, noon." And then they waited. The chapel was small, whitewashed, tucked between cottonwoods and stone. Tessa walked there with Joel in her arms, and the girls holding Miriam's hands. Jeremiah waited out front. And then they saw her. Thin, pale, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. Her hair was tangled, her shoes worn through. But her eyes, they were Lee's eyes. Her lips trembled as she approached. I didn't expect, I thought maybe it was a lie, that someone would punish me. No one here seeks to punish, Jeremiah said gently. She nodded, eyes never leaving the children. I'm May. I gave birth to them in a shelter. I was alone. Their father died before they were born. When the fever hit, I thought I wouldn't survive. So I wrapped them up, wrote the note, and asked God to send them where I couldn't. Tessa held Joel tighter, her voice guarded. Why come back? Because I got better, May said. Not fully, but enough to walk, enough to search, and I couldn't rest not knowing. Tears welled in her eyes. I never meant to abandon them. I just wanted them to live. Tessa's eyes narrowed, and now? May dropped to her knees. I don't want them back, I just want to see them smile, once, from a distance even. I'll go after that, I swear. Lee peeked from behind Miriam. Hope walked forward without fear, and placed a flower at May's feet. Joel babbled and held out his arms. It broke something in Tessa. She reached forward, helped May to her feet, and said, You may visit, sometimes with supervision, but they are our children now. May nodded, tears falling fast. That's more than I deserve. Tessa's jaw tightened. Maybe, but they deserve to know they were always wanted by all of us. And so it began. A new chapter. May stayed in a small room behind the chapel, helping sweep floors, baking bread, folding linens. She never overstepped, never asked for more. But sometimes, when Tessa allowed, she would sit with the babies and hum songs only a mother would know. Tessa watched from afar. Still protective. Still unsure. But not unkind. I never thought I'd have to share, she whispered to Miriam one day. And you're not, Miriam replied. You're opening the door, that's different. Christmas came. The first snow blanketed the hills, and Tessa helped the babies press handprints into the window pane, while Jeremiah set up a tree inside the barn. They hung paper ornaments, lit candles, sang hymns with May's quiet voice joining from the back row. And that night, in the soft flicker of candlelight, Tessa looked around the room. At Joel asleep on her chest. At Hope curled against May. At Lee tracing letters in Miriam's lap. At Jeremiah beside her, his hand warm in hers. And she realized this family had come from ashes. Not perfect, not planned. But real. And hers. Spring arrived quietly. Gone were the whipping winds of winter and the sharp sting of cold mornings. In their place came warmth, green shoots breaking through the dry soil, and the scent of new life carried on the breeze. The land around the cottage bloomed, wildflowers lining the path to the barn, cottonwood leaves dancing like silver coins in the sun, and bees lazily buzzing near the window where Joel pounded his chubby hands against the glass, fascinated. Tessa stood barefoot on the porch, rocking gently with Hope on her hip. Inside, Lee hummed a hymn she'd learned from Miriam, her voice shy but growing stronger with each day. In the yard, Jeremiah knelt in the garden, coaxing rows of tomatoes from the dirt, sleeves rolled back strong. The sight of him, tender, determined, patient, made her chest ache in the best way. He looked up and caught her gaze. A smile passed between them, quiet and full. She walked toward him, setting Hope down where Joel toddled in the grass. Everything's coming in early this year, Jeremiah said, brushing dirt from his hands. Tessa knelt beside him. You said that last year, too. He chuckled. I reckon I say it every spring, still surprises me every time. She turned to face him, her hands resting on her knees. You ever think about what we were before they came? Jeremiah's eyes softened. I try not to, because what we are now, it's the only thing that feels real. She reached out, fingers brushing his. Do you remember the first time you held Joel? He nodded. He was red-faced and squalling. I was terrified, thought I'd break him. You didn't. Didn't drop him either, he said with a grin. Tessa smiled, but it faded into something deeper. Sometimes I think God gave me them because he knew I couldn't bear to be empty much longer, not just my arms, but my soul. Jeremiah's hand wrapped around hers, and sometimes I think he sent them to save me just the same. That evening, the family gathered around a long table Jeremiah had built with his own hands, rough-hewn but strong, much like the man himself. May sat quietly at the far end, her health stronger now but her presence always careful, reverent. She never assumed, never demanded. She watched with awe and sometimes with sorrow too. Lee passed bread down the table. Hope tried sneaking extra butter. Joel tossed peas from his high chair with the enthusiasm of a boy discovering gravity. Miriam led the prayer, her voice unwavering. We thank you, Lord, for these blessings, for second chances, for hands to hold and hearts to love. Let us not forget what we've been given and help us give just the same. Jeremiah kissed Tessa's temple as she closed her eyes. She knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, after the children were asleep, and May had returned to her quarters behind the chapel, Tessa and Jeremiah sat under the stars. Do you ever wonder what they'll grow up to be? Tessa asked, her head on his shoulder. All the time, he murmured. Joel's gonna be a builder like me, or a preacher, he's already got the voice. Tessa laughed quietly. Hope will be a singer, I'm certain of it, she doesn't stop. And Lee? Tessa paused. She'll be the kind who makes the world better just by standing in it. They fell into silence, the kind that needs no words. Jeremiah broke it with a soft, thoughtful murmur. I want to adopt them officially. Tessa blinked. We already treat them as ours. I know, but I want them to carry our name. I want the world to know they're not just borrowed hearts. They're our own. Her hand found his. Then let's do it. The court hearing was small, quiet, but no less powerful. A judge who'd known Jeremiah since childhood officiated. Papers were signed. Names were changed. And when it was done, the children wore new last names. One's not tied to tragedy, but to hope. Hope McAllister. Joel McAllister. Lee McAllister. Outside the courthouse, Tessa wept quietly. Not because she was sad, but because she had never, in all her life, imagined a day where she would belong to something so beautiful. Jeremiah didn't speak, he just held her. And May, who stood behind them with trembling hands, turned away, hiding her face. She knew now her place was not as their mother, but as the woman who made the ultimate sacrifice so they could find their true home. And somehow in that pain she found peace. Time passed. Years even. The triplets grew like wild grass, tall and stubborn. Hope sang at the church. Lee read scripture with Miriam. Joel built tree houses and broke things with boyish glee. Jeremiah taught them to ride. Tessa taught them to pray. And together they gave those children what the world had once denied them, a childhood full of safety, laughter, and the unwavering knowledge that they were loved. Every year they visited the chapel on the anniversary of the night they found the babies. Miriam would bring a bouquet. Jeremiah would carry Joel on his shoulders. Tessa would kneel on the porch, close her eyes and whisper thank you. Not to the person who left them, but to the God who knew, before anyone else, that 3 abandoned souls were exactly what her heart had been waiting for. And though life still held trials, sickness, loss, struggle, none of it could undo what they'd built. Because what they'd found wasn't just family. It was redemption. It was healing. It was love.